Hi, I'm John Gibson, the pastor of the priest at Grace Episcopal Church, and I'm pleased to be with Becky Smith today. Becky, you are not a founder, but you might as well be.
And shortly thereafter.
Yes. Tell folks how you came to the church. This conversation is part of our 25th anniversary celebration of grace. Its first get together, Jill Allen talked a little bit about that in one of these videos, was in January of 1996. And when did you come to grace and how did you come to grace?
We were not there initially when they met in the school, but I think it was the following year. Sometime, and I say the following year, it could have been within just a few months. They had moved from meeting in the school to meeting at a nursing home on Barber Mill Road that had a common area that had a kitchen that was adjoined to it. And so they moved the sanctuary into the common area, and then we had the kitchen for fellowship. And I had heard that this was happening. And back when people still got hard copies of newspapers, we received the Smithfield Herald. And there was an ad, just a black and white, probably 5x7 ad, just shortly before Easter, that had a picture of a cup and a plate, and it said, "Come have your Easter meal with us." And it was done by Grace. Don't know why I saw that ad or even noticed it, but I told Jack at that point, I said, "We need to go. We're supposed to be there." And so we did. And we went, and of course there were people there that we knew and people we didn't know. And I remember very clearly that Garrison Hale, Emily Sanders, and Jake Allen were babies. So that was not yesterday.
Okay.
And so we went and enjoyed ourselves, even in that little multi-purpose room, for lack of a better word. It still was an Easter service. Mm-hmm. And so we went, and that's how we started attending. And we began to attend regularly after that. And then through that, we went through that process of moving from there because it really wasn't very big. And so we knew if we were going to grow, we needed a bigger space. And then that's when the school offered us their gymatorium, I think is what they called it. There was primarily a gym with a stage at one end. And all of a sudden we went from having this really tight space to this cavernous space. And so it's like, oh, how do we make this feel like a church? And Jack has some carpentry skills. And so Barbara Hendren, the rector at the time, had asked if he would look at possibly building a altar, lectern, whatever. And so he did. And knowing that our space was only available on Sunday, we had to be able to move those things on a regular basis, which is why to this day our altar is on wheels, because it was really too heavy to lift all the time, but moved very easily on wheels to be put in a storage closet at the end of our service.
So I just want to stop for just a second. So that's important for folks to know, that the altar that we have today is the same one that Jack built 23, 24 years ago, and the lectern as well. Same one, made by Jack.
And the credence table.
And the credence table, yes.
He built those three. The pulpit he built it as well, but it was not built until we moved into the current location. As each of our areas got bigger and bigger, we needed, it's like, oh, well, now we need this, and more traditional pieces that you might find in an Episcopal church. And the cross on the front of the altar came from Ethiopia. Emily brought it back after a mission trip to Ethiopia. She brought that cross that hangs on the front of the altar. So it has been there since we moved to Lee Court. But we've been there. He also took PVC pipe, and you may remember when you first came, there were some PVC pipe frames with white basically they were white twin sheets. I sewed those together and they slid down over that.
Mm-hmm.
And we lined those up on each side of our sanctuary in the school to keep it from feeling quite so big. It gave us a
Mm-hmm.
little more intimate feeling.
Okay.
So they stayed with us through that time period.
Mm-hmm.
We went from there to the bank building, and then from the bank building to the current location. So we've been through that process from not quite day one, but shortly thereafter.
And I just want to stop for a second to also add, so I think it's important for folks to know that you came because you saw an ad in the paper, because sometimes people are a little hesitant about outreach activities. And of course, today we're using things like Facebook and other social media. Unfortunately, to my mind, I liked the Clayton newspaper myself. I always liked reading it, and we used to advertise in that, but of course it doesn't exist anymore. But I think it's just important to know that somebody like yourself who's been with the church for years and years, you came because of an ad in the paper. I think the other thing to just point out is, as you said, you came when the church was at the senior center, and some people today would say, and I have heard this because I was at the Harvest Festival, and a woman came up to me and she said, "Well, you meet in a metal building, don't you? What's up with that?" And I said, "Yeah, we do meet in a metal building." And but to just say that you came in a facility which some people would say was even less than the current facility, but what was important for you was you found the community. I think the other thing that you said that I thought was striking is that it was an Easter service. There was the celebration of the resurrection, and that's what really stuck with you.
Yes. I mean, and it's like, come have your Easter meal,
Mm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was that invitation to communion.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I interpreted it. And so it's like, we're supposed to go. We've been invited to go. We're supposed to go. Ironically, I grew up in one of the oldest churches in the state in Beaufort at St. Paul's.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, Emily was getting ready to attend St. Mary's, where they have one of the other oldest chapels in the state.
Mm-hmm.
They turned 179 this year.
Wow.
And so, I was used to a very old traditional feel in church.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up wearing chapel caps because my head was supposed to be covered, and all of a sudden I'm going into this, looked like a little old lady's parlor to have communion and church and fellowship.
Yeah.
Yet I felt comfortable that that's where I was supposed to be.
What do you think helped make you feel comfortable? Because I know for most of the people who are going to be watching this are folks who are already at Grace. So they know Grace is a wonderful church. And for them, the metal building, that's not a big deal. But, some of our folks who might invite their friends or neighbors or family members, they might encounter this kind of thing. Well, you meet where? And what helped you feel comfortable, and what guidance might you give to somebody who's talking to who's a grace person who attends our church now, and but who might deal with this? What helped you feel comfortable, and what might you recommend that they say?
I think a lot of it is like the little children's song that says, "I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together." I went into it with an open mind, in that the building itself is not the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's the love and faith of the people that are there, and that all of that together is what the church is. And I felt that there that day. So I think it's important that we do keep that. Now, do I still love to go home and attend my old historic church? Absolutely. There's a feeling there too, but I will tell you this, all of the years that I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I knew that's where I was supposed to be and never doubted that, I remember going through a little DVD seminar thing at Grace after we moved into the bank building, and It was actually designed for people who were preparing for confirmation. But those of us, and I was on the vestry at the time, were encouraged to attend as well. It was a new thing, and it's like, and a lot of it was about the Holy Spirit. And I realized I had been a Christian all my life and Episcopalian most of it, but it wasn't until I started attending Grace that I felt like I actually experienced the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was and that's not a tangible thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the church doesn't have to be tangible. You don't have to be able to touch and feel it.
Mm-hmm.
That Holy Spirit is there regardless of where you are. Now, it works in a lot of places, and obviously it works in our building,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have to only work in our building.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
and how have you felt that Spirit working? You've talked about the love and the faith, and of course, been a lot of changes in Grace over the years, from the senior center to the elementaries. I guess you went from there to the East Clayton Elementary School, and then to the bank building, and now to Lee. I mean, a lot of changes over the year. How have you felt the Spirit?
I think a lot of it is also during that time was the National Convention with all the upheaval and the controversy. And that was happening when Grace was saying, okay, we need to make a move. And it's like, oh my gosh, if we do that, the rent's going up, we're losing people, what do we do? And there was just this strong faith. It's like the old baseball movie, if you build it, they will come. And I actually attended a seminar to that effect that said, if you build it, they will come. If you live it, they will stay. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like if we were going to survive as a church community, that we had to have faith and we had to live that faith. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Holy Spirit is all about, is being able to hold on to that and actually live it. Because if people see that and feel that, they'll stick around. Not everybody's going to stay because we're not suited for everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's what the guy that taught the seminar said. He said, I drive past 3 Episcopal churches to attend the one where I feel like I belong. Mm-hmm. We don't have that many options, but we may not be suited for everybody. That doesn't mean we don't try to include everybody, to give them that option. Mm-hmm. And so we have to live it. And so I feel like that's what I try to do every day. Mm-hmm.
It's that living of that faith, the love of God that we see in Jesus, and that welcoming also is obviously very important.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. What are some of your favorite memories of, almost 25 years? What are some of your favorite moments in the church?
One of it's a funny one because it's laughing at me, but when we were in the bank building at Lent, that one of those years, we did a movie study. And we had movies that we were to watch during the week. And then on Wednesday night, we would go for a simple supper and discuss the movie. And so they were just all kinds of things. I remember the Secondhand Lions was one of them. But we discussed the Keanu Reeves, now the whole thing has left my mind.
Is it The Matrix?
Yes, The Matrix and that whole series. Mm-hmm. And all these movies we talked about, is there a faith message in these, and what is it? Mm-hmm. And so I had never seen any of those movies, and so I watched them all. And then I began to do research and all this stuff, and we showed up on Wednesday night and this stuff came up, and I began to just share all this knowledge, and I just felt like I was overflowing with, gosh, yes, there really is all this faith connection in these movies. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, when we're done, Alex Agner looks at the entire group and says, who knew Miss Becky was going to be a Matrix expert? I mean, if he had had any idea how hard I worked to get to the point, but it's like it was important to me. And then when I found all these little things that some of them were obvious, it's like, the brothers, James and John, okay, just little things were more obvious, but I began to dig for the details but I did it because I found myself digging for myself.
Mm.
The experience, it's like, oh my gosh, sometimes we don't notice these things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true in life, that there are things all around us.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and then during that same time period, the children had a special little program that was done for them in a different room. And one of those nights, one of the twins, who were probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 at the time, came out and they had made rosaries. And there was this look on her face of endearing love. And she just said, look, I mean, to the people, to the masses that were there, it's a rosary. And it was like she had just discovered the greatest thing ever. And I thought, that's what we all need to feel. And it was just a little plastic bead rosary.
Mm-hmm.
But she was so pleased with herself that she had made it and they had learned what it represented. And I thought, sometimes we just need to get over ourselves and quit trying to make it complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can be just that simple if you let it. So, you know, me just being that early 1970s peace, love, dove girl, can't we all just get along? I mean, that's who I am. And I know everybody's not like that. But, you know, I look at the world today and go, does it have to be this hard? You know, oh, it ain't that bad. Can't we just chill and, you know, just accept who we are and just make it easy, you know? So that's what I have found there, is that loving God and loving one another. And, you know, it doesn't have to be hard. Even when times are hard. Sometimes you just have to let it go and let it happen.
Yeah. And I love what you were saying too, especially about the matrix, because I'm rereading Bishop Curry's book, Love is the Way. And he talks about, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, but he talks about how Moses is there at the burning bush. And so he takes off his feet, his shoes off his feet, because it's sacred ground, because he's listening, he's hearing the voice of God there. And Bishop Curry, and I think he might even be quoting somebody. So like I said, I know I'm messing this up, but he's talking about how that's the way it always is, that God is always there, that we're on this sacred ground. If we would just take our shoes off and realize that. And the difference is that some people do take their shoes off. They do listen to the voice of God, and other people are just sitting around that bush plucking berries. And so I like that. And I love how you, now I'm going to have to go back and watch. I love the Matrix series, but I did not realize all the faith connections. Now I'm going to have to go back and look at it again.
Well, and you saying that about Bishop Curry, I mean, that was another really powerful, well, there were 2 visits that he made. I mean, of course, any of his visits are always powerful. His first one was especially so, just, well, for one, Jack was confirmed in that first group. So that was special to us. But his sermon that day too was about the fact that Jesus did not put his A team together. You know, look at him. He chose a tax collector, and, you know, who in this room loves the tax collector? And he chose 2 brothers that professed to be fishermen and never read anywhere where they caught anything. They had to check with their mother about everything, you know, and he went through one at a time. And it's like, in other words, he didn't put his A team together, but what he did do is he put a group together that's like me and you. And so that's why, you know, we're all called to be disciples. We're ordinary people, and that's what he wants. It doesn't look quite as real if everything is grand and glorious. If it's just the ordinary people experiencing it every day, then people can say, well, gosh, if that person can do it, why can't I? You know, so it just leaves that open to those that are watching you. So, and during that time period, I actually had a fairly newcomer comment in a seminar. She said, I'll never forget the day I met Becky Smith. And it's like, do what? I had no idea. she said, my first Sunday there, and she came to me and my children that were being rowdy, and she wasn't put off by it. And I mean, and that's why I came back.
Hmm.
And so I realized, be careful. People are watching, that may, good or bad, they're watching.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that you're living it, because you don't know when that might be or who you might influence.
Yeah, that's so true. That's just so true. Thank you for that. Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about a time, and you mentioned it. Sometimes when you're doing this kind of reflection, there's a tendency to just focus on the positive, and that's kind of natural. I mean, we look back at the history, and we do want to focus on the good, and I think that's important. But I think it's also important that we talk about during this 25th anniversary that Grace has been through some challenging times.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned one of them, and that was, for people who might not be aware, this was in 2003. It was a hard time for the entire Episcopal Church. This was when Gene Robinson, an openly gay, openly partnered man, was chosen, and then he became the Bishop of New Hampshire. And a lot of people left the Episcopal Church at that time. And I understand that was a particularly difficult time for Grace. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was difficult from a faith standpoint, and it was difficult from a financial standpoint for us. We were already being supported by the diocese and still struggling. We were struggling every month to try to pay the rent and the bill, those month-to-month expenses that you have. And I remember Bishop Curry had a visit with us in the bank building, and him saying, he spoke to us about that and said, I voted in support of Gene Robinson. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. I did. All 3 bishops from North Carolina did. And he said, I did not do that willy-nilly. I mean, I just said, oh, I think I'll vote yes. He said, with great discernment and prayer and just all kinds of stuff, trying to do the right thing. And he said, and then I made that decision. And I realized at that point, I did what I thought was right. And if it wasn't right, then I will answer for that in God's time. So I just remember thinking, and we had a church meeting, and people were angry, and they stood up, and some of them walked out. And I sat there and I listened to all of it because I wanted to hear what everybody had to say. And when it was all said and done, I said, I'd like to say one thing. And I was recognized, and I stood up and I said, I chose this church, and it was my church the first time I walked in, and it will still be my church when I walk out of here today. God called me here, and I believe that. I can't just walk out. Because obviously there's something I'm supposed to be doing. And, and so it was hard because people that you cared about and trusted left. Since that time, they've made other decisions about their spiritual journey, but I had to trust that it's like, God didn't bring me here to, send me packing a year or so later. And I think those that stayed kind of, like my grandmother used to say, hunkered down and said, we can do, we got to do this. We can do this. And so it was there were lots of difficult months. And then we made that major decision of moving to the current location, which was a drastic increase in rent. And that was going to be tough again. But we just kept on keeping on. And with time, it got a little easier. We'd have another speed bump or whatever along that journey, but it just kept going. So, I just have to believe that it will keep going. As long as we keep that faith and know that, I heard somebody say in there one time, we are experts at flying by the seat of our pants. So nobody was caught up. I mean, nobody panicked the year that Barbara called Marla, who was our senior warden, from the hospital on the Sunday that the children's Christmas pageant was supposed to be. And Marla in turn called our house, and the pageant that year had Jack as the angel of the Lord with all these little children, and he, float around behind them in his white robe with pixie dust in his pocket. And the children loved it, but he was the angel of the Lord. And Marla's words were, Barbara called, she's in the hospital, and this is on Sunday morning. We're getting ready to go to church. She's in the hospital and won't be there today. And quite frankly, I thought the angel of the Lord should know. And we went, and it's like, okay. And suddenly I became the director, and it's like, okay, you do this and you do this and you do this. And let's see, a service. No, we can't do the Great Thanksgiving. The rector's not here, so we'll cut that. And okay, here's what we're doing. And when service started, we went through it, and everybody loved the pageant, and the children thought it was great. But we had to fly by the seat of our pants, and that's what we've learned to do quite well.
So a real sense of resilience, a real adaptability too. These are characteristics of this congregation, which I think for newer folks, it's important to know. So,
well, and it might be difficult to be that way if we had a traditional old Episcopal church.
Yeah,
we're used to this. We can do this,
Okay, now I got to ask: do you have a picture of the angel of the Lord with the pixie dust? Because if you do, I want that.
I don't have one, but I bet there's one floating around somewhere.
So if somebody is watching this and you have that picture, you send it to me, because I want that picture. So
absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Well, Becky, this has been wonderful. I hope that we'll get to talk again, because I know that you have more memories, and I'd love to hear more about the stories. I just think it's so wonderful, these stories, because they really are so much, they're not just history, they're family stories. And I think family stories are sacred. They talk about the identity, who we are, but also who God is and how God has worked in the life of a particular community. And it's clear that God has definitely been at work in your life, as well as in the life of this community. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope we'll get to talk and hear some more stories.
Be sure and ask me about prayer shawls. We'll talk.
Prayer shawls. Yes, we'll have to talk about prayer shawls. Another thing I want to talk to you about next time is raising your daughter in the church. Yeah. So, okay. But maybe we shouldn't tell her that in advance.
No. Okay. We won't tell her ahead of time.
We won't tell that one. Okay. All right. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you, John.